Hello, Steve. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming. What we commonly understand by democracy is in danger of being cleared away by autocrats in many countries. There are hardly any people who question the state as condition of the possibility of solving problems. We want to investigate in a scientific conference from 19th to 21st March 2021 at the University of Education at Freiburg, whether there are more just, more liberal, more loving, and more meaningful solutions outside of the state. Stephen Shalom will be one of our speakers. My name is Thomas Stöllner, and I would like to warmly welcome Stephen Shalom to our conversation today. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
When I was diving into anarchism, looking for other ways to organize economy, I finally discovered participatory economy. But that was not enough. Economy is only a part of a culture. It is an important one, but not all. I was born and raised in Bavaria, so I have at least heard of a council republic. It was only working a week in 1919, but at least it found its way into the school books. Finally, I discovered a small paper of yours declaring something similar. There is not much around that tries to set up something that comes around with an elaborated concept of how to come to decisions in a way where everyone has a say. But before we go deeper into your vision and concept of participatory polity, I would like to talk to you about the mess we are in. A few years ago, Warren Buffett said, there's class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war, and we are winning. How is it possible? Then in a so-called democracy, a small group of people is obviously telling all others where to go.
Well, in the United States, we have a formal bourgeois democracy, and some people use the term disparagingly as a step towards saying, therefore, we can replace it with dictatorship because bourgeois democracy is phony. That's not my point of view. I think bourgeois democracy is very, very limited and undemocratic in many ways, but it's still a great advance over previous forms of dictatorship. And the problem with bourgeois democracy is that it needs to be extended and to be made into full and real democracy. But some of the achievements of bourgeois democracy, like civil liberties, free speech, regular elections, those are things we would want to build on, not things we would want to take away. But if you go through the various institutions of the United States' political system, and this is true of each of the capitalist democracies around the world to varying degrees. Some are worse, and in many respects, the United States stands out. Some are a little better, but I believe they all have certain limits, and that's why we've got to transcend bourgeois capitalist democracy with something else. But so let me just take a few examples from the United States to show why it is a far cry from what we would intuitively think of as democracy. Okay. So take some question like the right to abortion. Public opinion polls show consistently that a solid majority of Americans favor a legal right to abortion.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask questions about late-term abortion and various other
Mm-hmm.
detailed aspects, there are differences of opinion, but on the basic idea, should abortion be legal in the United States, a clear majority of the population favors that. And this is something that, therefore, if a majority favors something, you'd think a basic democratic outcome would be that that would be the policy you have.
Mm-hmm.
But in the United States, we have the following factors. We have a Supreme Court that can rule on whether things are constitutional or unconstitutional. That Supreme Court is not elected by the majority. There are currently 9 justices on the Supreme Court, and 6 of them, 6 of the 9, have been chosen by Republican presidents.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 2/3. The Republicans have never controlled 2/3 of public opinion on anything.
Mm-hmm.
But yet they've got 2/3 of the justices. Now, how did they get these justices? Well, when President Obama, in the last year of his term in 2016, nominated a justice for the Supreme Court, the Republicans in the Senate said, we will not take up that nomination. We will not vote on it because it's inappropriate to vote on somebody in the last year of a president's term. And one senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, famously said, it is wrong to take up a judgeship in the last year. And if this ever happens in the other direction, you can call me a hypocrite because that would be totally wrong.
Oh.
And so that candidate was not taken up. And now under President Trump, he remains president for another 2 weeks. In the closing days of his administration, he rushed through a candidate, and the Senate, by the narrowest of margins, approved that candidate. Now, you might say, but okay, the Senate reflects a majority of the American people. But no, it doesn't. And that's another aspect of the American political system. We've got 2 houses of our legislature, a Senate and a House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is elected by population, but with gerrymandering, the drawing of district lines for partisan advantage, it is in fact the case that the House of Representatives sharply overrepresents Republican voters. But in the Senate, there's not even the pretense of one person, one vote. Each state gets 2 votes. So very Democratic-leaning California gets 2 senators, and very Republican Wyoming gets 2 senators. And even though California has 50 times the vote, the number of people as Wyoming, they get the same representation. So if you take all the senators who voted for these judges, these Republican judges over the years, and approved their nominations, those senators represented maybe 40% of the American population. So we have a president of the United States, Trump, and we had a previous president of the United States, George Bush, both of whom were elected with less than a majority of the vote. the opposing candidate got more votes than them.
Mm-hmm.
They then nominated justices who were approved by a Senate that represented less than half the people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you can have a Supreme Court that today it is assumed has 6 votes to eliminate, or at least 5 votes to eliminate the right to legal abortion, despite the fact that it's a majority sentiment.
Mm-hmm. So it seems that the way you construct institutions in this way, so-called democratic institutions, has a very big impact on how decisions are made, or what kind of people rule, or what laws are installed.
Absolutely.
So that's a very, very good example for that. So if you can change our current representative system into another one that is more democratic, it may be even better than these representative democracies we have in Scandinavia or in Switzerland. Parliaments. People do not vote, or many people, as I see, do not vote in their interests. They vote for the wrong guys, especially if you take Trump. There must be something wrong in voting, needn't it? What is your perspective on voting?
Well, okay, so there are other features of capitalist democracy. One of them relates to the capitalist part.
Mm-hmm.
That is, money is an important factor in the outcome of elections. Now, a political system could mitigate the harm of money. They could make all elections publicly funded. In the United States, that is not the case. Public funding is at such a low level that candidates of both parties basically say, I'm not going to accept public funding because then there are certain limits on what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's not the case that the candidate with the most money always wins.
Mm-hmm.
But it does give you a distinct advantage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are various other ways. So I remember years ago when a progressive tax was proposed in a state I was living in. A progressive tax means that the majority of the population will be paying less, and just the people at the very top will be paying more. So you'd think, so this is a clear example of where if the majority ruled, the majority would favor a progressive tax. The thing they would favor least would be a regressive tax, where the less money you have, the higher your percentage of taxation. But yet, the airwaves were flooded with advertisements from the insurance companies and the banks saying, don't turn this into communism, and that kind of stuff. And lots of people, as you say, voted against their interests. Now, it's probably also the case that lots of people just didn't bother voting on that issue. In the United States, we have referendums on the ballot from time to time, and they tend to get many fewer people voting either way than do presidential candidates. And that's because the issues seem complicated. People can't really follow them. Elections are held on a day when you're working. Now but it's not that people are too dumb to follow these issues. The same people who we say, oh, how could they not understand this political question? Those same people can tell you how many home runs that player hit in 1947. So they know lots of stuff. They could tell you which actress was having an affair with which actor before the second marriage of that person. Right? So people know lots of things, but if there's something that seems irrelevant to their lives,
Mm-hmm.
then they don't invest the time and the energy into learning about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that seems to many people to be their experience with politics.
Mm-hmm.
That you know, an example I often like to use is, imagine if you were around in 1964 and you heard a presidential candidate say, vote for me, and I'm opposed to sending American boys, just boys, no girls at the time. I'm opposed to sending American boys 10,000 miles away to do something in Vietnam that the Vietnamese should be doing for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
He won by a landslide, Lyndon Johnson against Barry Goldwater.
Mm-hmm.
And within months of his election, he proceeded to send American boys 10,000 miles to Vietnam to try to crush the Vietnamese revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people get the impression, what's the use of voting? Why? I actually studied this question of Vietnam, someone might say. I learned about it. I learned the whole history, and I decided, yeah, I'm opposed to this war. But yet you vote and it seems to have no effect. So that has a discouraging effect on a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be isn't it a failure in the structure of how our democracy is designed, that people don't really have a say? So the representative model, what is a very strong argument of the anarchists, the representative model can never be democratic, so that everyone has a say in the issues that are concerning oneself. So what's wrong with parliaments? Can they be improved at all? Of course, we can. You mentioned the problem with money. So if you have a lot of money and you can invest it in advertisement, that it seems to work. It seems to work because where else you can see that is that a lot of companies are paying more money in commercials than in the production of their products. So it must have a sense that they do that. And politicians are kind of copying that system, giving a lot of money in advertisement or commercials for themselves or their ideas. And that is successful. It is very successful. Not always, but often. So
and it's
mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, and you know, with commercial advertisements, there's some limits on how much you can lie. So you can't say this product cures headaches if in fact it doesn't cure headaches. But if a politician says, my opponent is going to do such and such, they can say the most false and scandalous things, and they can sort of get away with it. Now, it's tricky because you don't want some official to be looking at political ads saying true, true, no, false, false, because that gives too much power to that official. But on the other hand, what it does mean is that the abilities to manipulate the population are quite high.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. So the representative model of democracy has its failures or problems. The old Greeks, for example, chose their political leaders by lot because they meant that elections lead to an oligarchy and the lot goes for democracy. Why that? What experiences lead them to that insight?
Well, we actually have one institution in the United States that, to some degree, uses that idea of lots
Mhm.
as a democratic institution, and that's our jury system. Now,
Pardon?
not all
What kind of
democracies.
system?
Our jury,
Okay.
our jury
Mhm. Yeah.
system. Okay? Now, not all democracies have
Mhm.
juries. There's some that comes out of the British
Mhm.
tradition. Um, but its basic functioning is, we're going to take a random cross section of your fellow citizens who will sit in judgment
Mhm.
over you.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And we will make sure that you're not actually the brother of the defendant.
Mhm.
You can't sit on the jury. We'll make sure you're not also the aunt of the victim. You
Mhm.
can't sit on the jury.
Mhm.
So there's uh, some attempt to vet who
Mhm.
can sit on the jury, but the basic idea is that if we take 12 people at random, this will give us a sense of what the people think
Mhm.
about something.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And um, that offers an opportunity for allowing democracy rather than oligarchy to
Mhm.
prevail.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, um, now there are legislators and there are those who execute the laws. And in the Greek uh, system, uh, where they did practice a sortition, or
Mhm.
uh, choosing people by lot, um, their generals were not chosen that way.
I know
Um,
military was the exception.
right, but they're also skilled people,
Mhm.
right? So for some things you want to do it, in other words, making political moral judgments, you want that to reflect the people.
Mhm.
But uh, to decide to perform the brain surgery on you,
Mhm.
you don't want a cross section of the population doing that. You want, the most
Mhm.
uh,
But
skilled doctor.
also for political decisions, you don't have to exclude experts. There are two examples happened in Europe in recent times. One was in Ireland. They chose a kind of councils to develop a law for marriage, especially for homosexual marriage. So they did that because politicians thought, we choose by random and we will never ever get homosexual marriage because they are so Catholic on average, they will never allow that. And they had so they chose people by random, by lot, and they got together and discussed the problem. They had 1 year time, and they also had talks with experts and several other scientists or politicians, and finally they got a very liberal law for the marriage. And the parliament also oh, I don't know what to call it in English. They said that the law was done. the council
Enacted. Yeah.
enacted. Thank you very much. And there's another example in France. France, the president Mitterrand, no, not Mitterrand. Who's president in France now?
Macron.
Macron, thank you. Macron decided, because of the pressure of the Yellow Vests, that he wanted to have a council for climate. And so also people were chosen by random, and they developed proposals. And he thought, or at least I think that he thought, that they will never develop radical proposals. So the same, it's always the same thought. If we choose people, normal people, like, or from the working class, from the middle class, whereas people from the working class are seen as a problem because they are too dumb for politics. So we can choose them and they will always do what we want, or at least we can do what we want, because their proposals are never, ever good. So people came together for this council and developed proposals, and they were very radical, very radical. So I don't know what they did with these proposals, but the interesting thing is, if people get in touch with problems, if they have the right and the time to inform themselves, and they talk with experts and so forth, they will come what I think we will see as good proposals, or they get in discussion and they make good laws. They are concerned by the public good, so to say.
Yeah, well, so this is one of the features that I try to incorporate in my political vision, this notion of deliberative democracy. So there are various problems with representative democracy. We mentioned money, we mentioned the giving improper weight to people from one state rather than another state. But let me just run through 2 or 3 other flaws in representative democracy, but then mention 2 important positives that you also want to incorporate into a good system. So another flaw with representative democracy is that representatives can either change their mind, and so you voted for someone who said X, and they now vote for Y. So you might say, we could solve this by requiring people to keep their campaign promises. But the problem with that is, what happens when the situation changes? So, you know, we had a situation in the United States where a governor ran on a platform saying, I will not raise taxes. And the day he won election, he said, you know, I just won the election. The previous governor called me in and said, okay, now you've won, let me tell you what our budget situation actually is. I was actually taking out a lot more money than I mentioned. So we're actually bankrupt. And so that new governor said, so my fellow citizens, I'm going to do the exact opposite of what I said because the situation changed. Do we want to give him the authority to do that or not? If we don't, we're going to be caught in a lot of very desperate situations. But if we do, that of course is the opening to totally betray your constituents. Another problem with representative democracy, you go and vote for somebody who best matches your views, but that means they don't necessarily agree with your views on all questions. So they're not really representing you in general, they're representing you, you hope, more often than not. So that causes you to vote for candidates.
Oh, now you're gone.
Um,
Oh.
If representatives stay in office too long, if they're incumbents, it's very hard to get rid of them. So you might say, so let's have term limits. So, you could only serve 2 terms or a certain number of years. But the problem with term limits is it means in the candidate's last term, the public has no check over their representative. The usual check is, if you don't do what we want, we're not going to vote for you next time. But if there's term limits, they have a free pass to do what they want. So all these are problems with representative democracy, but there are 2 points that representative democracy makes that are important. One is of governing takes a lot of time. Members of parliament, members of Congress do it as a full-time job. Okay. If every single issue were going to be voted on by all of us, would we be spending as much time as they do on governing? Would we have time for anything else? So there's a time problem. The second problem is, now I just lost my train of thought here. The second problem is, the second benefit of representative democracy is that representatives deliberate. They go into a body, there might be 100 of them or whatever, and they discuss, they argue. They had an original proposal and they amend it, and they add this, and they compromise here, and they vote on that, and so on. Too often, the alternative of referendum democracy, where let the whole population vote on every question, you don't have the opportunity to deliberate. Now, what those examples you gave, and what further social science studies have shown, is that the people will be pretty ignorant, intolerant, etc., if they are just forced to make a decision off the top of their heads. But if you give them time to deliberate with others, to see others, understand their arguments, sympathize with their fellow human beings, then they can come to proposals that are, as you said, quite progressive, and quite tolerant, quite imaginative, and a bunch of people, if you just ask them, what's your opinion on this question, the majority sentiment tends to sound pretty intolerant. You give them time to deliberate, and they come to a different kind of conclusion. So that's a good thing about representative democracy. So what you'd want is some method by which you could combine that aspect of deliberation without all the negative aspects of representative democracy. And so, so small scale, having people in face-to-face meetings, that's a place where deliberation can take place. That takes place in juries. It takes place in a court of 9 judges. They deliberate. And so if you can have small councils, not so small that there's not enough diversity of opinion, but small enough that it's face to face, so that everybody can participate and be part of the process, that's likely to be a way to come up with good and just decisions without the problems of the negative problems of representative democracy that I've mentioned. So you want to avoid a representative system, but you also don't want a referendum democracy. I mean, so for example, some have said, now that we have this technology, why don't we just have every single issue that comes up, that currently comes up to Congress or to Parliament, people just go on their computers and they vote. Because people will still be voting as individuals, as isolated, separate individuals, rather than participating in a deliberative process.
What David Graeber mentioned here is that one problem of the referendum is that we see that in Switzerland, that it only has its possibilities of yes or no. So the deliberative process is not there. So there is no other options that can pop up. Whereas when you discuss and argue, there are always maybe not only two ways, but three, or there's a fourth way to do things. Or there's a completely different situation perspective coming up in the deliberative process. So this is absolutely missing in referendums. But that is not your vision of democracy, but there are still the councils. And I think because what Murray Bookchin said is that the argument has to be in the middle of democracy. We have to find a way of organizing ourselves that puts the argument in the center. Before we go into the detail of how the argument can be emphasized in the deliberative process within councils, I'd like to talk about the values that lead us to a more democratic society or organization besides representative democracy, but nested councils or council republic. So what would you say are the values that should bring about a different or new or better system than we have it now?
Okay, well, so the first one I would mention, not because it's the most important, but because it ties into what we've been talking about so far, it relates to another limitation of representative democracy. Representative democracy views the political process entirely as instrumental. That is, you want to get food delivered, you want to get roads built, you want to get different things done, and so elect representatives who will get that done for you. But there's no sense in which, there's no understanding that political participation is a value in and of itself. It makes you understand your own kinship with your fellow citizens. It makes you smarter. It makes you a better and fuller person. And so that's a benefit of a participatory system that is lost in a representative system. Now, you can carry this too far. You could say, because I am a political activist and I like to spend 23 hours a day doing politics, therefore everybody should like to do that. And if you don't, too bad. No. One has to realize that we're trying to build a society for everyone, not just for the political fanatics. So There has to be some time limit on our participation.
Mm,
But the bottom line is participation, the act of participating is a value that our system should welcome within limits as a way to make better people.
mm, mm,
Okay, other values. We care about liberty. That is, people should have the ability to do what they want insofar as it doesn't harm others.
mm,
Now, there are tough, complicated cases at the margins here.
mm,
Okay? But the basic principle should be we would like to give people as much freedom as we can, as much opportunity to do what they want in ways that they want. Another value, and this might cut across the liberty to some degree, is solidarity. We want people to care about other people. And we want institutions that incentivize caring about other people rather than disincentivize caring about others.
mm,
So capitalism in its essence encourages you to be selfish.
mm,
If if as a child you said, "Oh, I'm going to sell my baseball card collection, and I'm going to see how little I can get for it," your parent would say to you, "What are you, a moron? You can't do that. You try to get as much as you can."
oh,
And if you said, no, because if I get a little, then the person would have gotten a very good deal and they'll be very happy. Parent says, "No, you're crazy. You can't do that."
mm, mm,
The whole idea of capitalism is to um, buy cheap and to sell dear.
mm.
Um,
Maximizing profits.
right. That's what profit maximizing is.
And you have to,
So
the ideas of solidarity is the trickle down effect. Okay, if everyone does it, the public will profit by the outcomes.
right now, I don't like to use the phrase "trickle down" because, at least in the United States, that was used politically by the Reagan administration
Mm,
back in the 80s. That is, Reagan said, "Here's what we should do with taxes. We should lower taxes on the rich,
mm,
and then the benefit will trickle down to everyone."
mm,
Okay?
mm,
So what solidarity should trickle across to everyone rather than trickle down
mm.
in
Yeah.
the Reagan way.
Mm.
Okay. Um,
But before we go to the next point, I
yeah,
don't know if you know the book of Rebecca Solnit, Paradise Built in Hell.
yeah,
Because I think when I hear people talking, it seems like it is our nature to be selfish. Yeah, capitalism is arguing that it is only fulfilling our nature to be selfish. It's just the system that is in our genes. Yeah, the political and economic system. And because I think this book of Rebecca Solnit is wonderful, that she visited a lot of spaces where there happened something really evil, like Katrina, the hurricane in the States. And what she discovered was that before the state comes, before the police came, people acted very, very helpful. They were solidaric with each other. And there was nothing to see of a selfish human being. On the contrary, on the contrary. and it's kind of an achievement of capitalism, yeah, that it could turn around the best of us, or if you remember Kropotkin, who wrote this book Mutual Aid, that we are able and kind of designed to help one another, and capitalism had achieved to turn this around and made this ideology of the selfish human being successful. And we are trying hard to be more realistic and show by scientific studies on the daily experience of people that we are not selfish, or at least not to that extent that capitalism is saying. We are also, and to a very big extent, I would say a bigger one, we are a helpful species. And we gotta find ways to put that into our system again. And that's what you said. We have to find institutions that not foster the selfish attitudes or genes or whatever in us, but the solidarity that is also part of us. So
right. So I think we want to at the same time say we don't think human beings are innately evil. We do think human beings have attributes that make them inclined towards sympathy towards their fellow human being. But we want to build institutions that enhance those good aspects and minimize those bad aspects. I don't think we can say we want to design a system that assumes everybody is going to be perfectly angelic. For two reasons. One, because any system, the transition problem, if tomorrow we had a great society, the people living in it are people who were born and brought up prior to that, and therefore they've still got lots of bad characteristics. And second, I think it's too tough a standard to say we will design a system that will only work if everybody is totally selfless, if everybody is prepared to jump in front of that bullet that was meant for their neighbor. So I think capitalism makes us monsters, and we can do much better, but we don't have to assume perfection as we move forward. Yeah, and so two other values. Another one of them is justice or fairness. So again, here's a case where there are some tough questions. What counts as fair here? But I think there's this this analogy of going on a camping trip. Imagine a group of people going on a camping trip, and one of them says, when they get out into the woods, one of them says, well, look, since I'm more skilled at this activity, more skilled at fishing than the rest of you, I will fish and I will have 3 portions of fish, and the rest of you will only have 1 portion of fish each, because I'm more skilled, right? The other friends would probably sit around and say, what are you, a jerk? Come on, stop that. That's not how you behave. That sort of offends our basic sense of justice. The fact that you happen to have better skills than someone else doesn't entitle you to a vastly better remuneration than someone else. Okay? And so we want a system that is tolerant, allows for differences in people's tastes and attitudes and aptitudes, etc. But we also want one that's fair, that comports with our basic instinctive feelings of what a just allocation of things would be.
Okay. And any other values before?
Liberty, justice, participation, solidarity, tolerance. And I guess one other is efficiency. That is, we don't want a system that makes us have to work twice as much to get something, and because that will be sort of bad for everyone.
When you said something about the institutions or the process that enhances this or that behavior, I read an article on an anarchist website of Mark Lance. He wrote the article fetishizing process, when he said, okay, we cannot create the perfect human being. On the other hand, we need the perfect human being for our system. So he emphasized that you cannot give a blueprint of a perfect system. You also have to see what is the material you have. So human beings, and he's proposed a Aristotle way to give people the opportunity to improve themselves, okay, by virtues you have in a certain societies, and they should aim after go for these virtues in the given society. And then he said the system is not that important if all have the virtues you declared as values. If everyone has the virtue of solidarity, fairness, and so forth, we could live in a kingdom or in an empire. It's not important anymore, because both the king and the worker will do its best, and they have the same opportunities, because the things the worker wants is given by the king, because he has the virtue of treating everyone like himself. So that's it with the system. I don't think so, but
yeah, I mean, if everybody had all the right virtues, system wouldn't matter. But would everybody have the right virtues in the absence of a system that promoted and encouraged those virtues?
I think.
I mean, so for example, one of the things that that Henry Kissinger said is that the American political system encourages to rise to the top those people who are most power hungry and obsessed with power. Because it's a lot of work to get there. And so you've got to really be driven and like to control others. And so this again is one of the virtues of a random procedure, because then it isn't the people that are most obsessed with power who come to hold power. But sort of in the same way, you could say if the people who held power were totally unconcerned about wielding their power in a bad way, then everything would be great. True, but if you don't set the system up to make sure that they can't abuse it, it will attract those who might.
Yes, I agree. And it's a little tricky of him saying that because the effort to get to the top is for a lot of people not that much. But for working class people, it's almost impossible to get there. You don't have the American democracy ever had a president from the working class?
Well, it depends how you define it, I guess.
Okay.
Marx,
not in France, not in Britain.
Karl Marx referred to Lincoln as a son of the working class.
Okay.
And certainly if you mean, might they have in the previous generation been working class, then yeah, there were a number.
Germany has had one with Chancellor Schröder, and it's not that long ago, but a lot of people like me would say he betrayed the people who voted for him, or he betrayed the working class. So it is not only important where you come from, but also what values you share and what you do. And he definitely was a neoliberal who, basically, or in most of his acting, made rich richer. So it doesn't not always is that important where you come from. But let's get to the core, to your vision of the nested councils. Would you also call it a council republic?
I haven't used the term. I guess there are different ways you can organize councils. And I felt it was important to indicate that mine involved nested councils.
Okay.
But calling it nested councils too opens itself up to one common misinterpretation. And so let me clarify that. Many people think that nested councils is simply one group elects a representative to the next group. That group has representatives from various groups, and they then elect representatives to the next group, and so on. And that's the full decision-making apparatus. The problem with that is that that's actually a system of indirect elections. So in the original United States Constitution, what happened was this: citizens in a state would elect a state legislature, and the state legislature would then elect a senator. And the senator would be the one who went to Washington. And in the Federalist Papers, those articles written by Hamilton and Jay and Madison explaining the virtues of the Constitution, in the Federalist Papers, they say, look, this is a really good system. You don't have to worry about some wild radicals getting to the Senate, because the senators are going to be chosen by another bunch of people, the state legislators, who are themselves going to be sober and wise men. So this was a way to separate, to keep people further away from power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Electoral College, that institution in the United States that allowed Trump to become president and George W. Bush to become president in 2000, is a system of indirect elections. Rather than the voters voting for the president, they vote for electors in their own state, which is essentially the Electoral College, so that you could have a majority of the vote in the country, but not win the Electoral College. So if you just had nested councils, you could have the same problem. Imagine this. Imagine that there are 10 councils of 10 people each. And in 7 of the councils, the vote is 6-4.
Mm-hmm.
And in 3 of the councils, the vote is 0-10. Well, in that case, the second, there are 30 plus 24, 30 plus 28. There are 58 voters in favor of the second option and 42 in favor of the first option. But in fact, the first option would win because they had 6 councils in favor, and so they would send 6 representatives to the next council.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a criticism of indirect elections, and it's a valid criticism. And that's why built into my system was the idea that these councils are places where deliberation takes place at each level, but when there is a close vote, or when it is requested either by a higher council or a lower council, the vote goes back to the lowest council.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you could still have the deliberation at all these different levels and
Okay.
refine and reword. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just yes, no that David Graeber talked about. But ultimately, it's not going to be the top council that makes the close vote,
Mm-hmm.
which might misinterpret the will of the people, but it's something that gets sent back down.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have to cover 2 fields within your proposals of a council republic. One is how to, or at least as I see it, one is how do people in a council get to decisions? How do they do that? How can we ensure that the argument is in the center of decision making? And what decisions do council have to make? That leads to the second field. How are the councils organized? What councils make what decisions? What kind of decisions have to be made on what level? So they have to be certain levels or more than one. How do the levels interact? You already said that if the vote is not clear, it goes back to the lower council. What structures do the nested councils have? Who belongs to which council? In the Council Republic in 1919, in Germany, people, or in Bavaria, people were in their correlating council respective to the job they had. There were soldier councils, worker councils, and so forth. Murray Bookchin criticized that because people and their interests were too similar in such councils. Therefore, he proposed to bring people together according to where they live. But we have the problem that in capitalist societies, people live separately according to their income. So you have in every city in the States, or also in I guess in a lot of countries, regions where only rich people live, and you won't meet anyone who's poor there, because these people cannot afford to live there. So that's a problem. So how could we solve that problem? What would you suggest? But let us start from the beginning. Who is in a council, and how many are in one?
Okay, well, I think I agree with Bookchin about a geographic basis for councils.
Okay.
Um, um, there have been some who've talked about a society of workers' councils. Um, that causes the problem. Well, what do you do about students? Well, you can say, okay, students will have a students' council. And if you've got soldiers, you could have a soldiers' council,
Mhm.
etc. What do you do about people who are not in the workforce,
Mhm.
like people who are taking care of their own children? Um, that gets a little trickier. Um,
Mhm.
Presumably, you wouldn't have unemployed people in a good society, but you would have retired people.
Mhm.
And so would retired people from all over come together in a council? They might not all be living in the same
Mhm.
place. They might want to live in multi-generational housing,
Mhm.
which would be a good thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so, uh, uh, so uh, geographic based representation seems like it guarantees that everybody will be covered.
Mhm.
Okay. What will the size be?
Okay, but in the
Yeah.
geographic based council has the problem in our societies that uh, rich
Segregated
people
housing. Yeah,
segregated
yeah.
housing. Yeah. Okay, you don't have. I live in Austria now, close to Vienna. Vienna has Vienna does not have this problem, because in the beginning of the 20th century they had the red Vienna. They built community houses, or yeah, community houses. I don't know what else, in regions where only rich people lived. So they have a very um, mixed population. Poor people live besides rich people. They don't have this problem, but it's an exception.
Right,
It's an exception.
but right, but so one of the premises of um, my
Mhm.
political design is that this is a design that applies to a society that has, roughly speaking, something like a participatory economic system.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
so when you ask me, well, what happens when a rich person comes into a council? No, we don't have rich people.
Mhm.
That is, people are already,
Mhm.
it's a sort of a presupposition of this model
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
people, so I'm not assuming that their minds are already
Mhm.
fully participatory,
Mhm.
but I am assuming that the economic system, that mansion has been divided into 6 apartments.
Mhm.
So everybody has the same, the same kind of level of housing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very important to mention. Mhm.
Yeah, and so that applies in other realms aside just from where people live,
Mhm.
right? So that's also going to apply to, well, what happens if a rich person decides to buy the votes of some? Well,
Mhm.
again, people have got roughly equal incomes.
Okay. Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Okay, so what size? I don't know. Here's they should be small enough that you could have um, deliberative meetings, which
Mm,
probably means face-to-face meetings. Um, if you have, a lot of us have been doing Zoom meetings lately.
mm,
How many people could you have at a Zoom meeting and still have a reasonable conversation where there's give and take and participation?
mm,
Um, I don't know. That's something that people would sort of discover with practice and
mm,
over time, and different people may come to different conclusions as
mm,
to what that would be. Um,
mm,
it would be good that councils had about the same number of people,
mm,
but um, they don't have to have exactly the same number of people. And
mm,
because some people will move or die or uh, become of age or whatever,
mm,
the numbers will change a bit over time.
mm,
That's okay. But my assumption is somewhere between 20 and 50.
mm, mm,
And and here's what that means.
mm. I think
If
it also,
it's
excuse me, I think it also depends on the topic you have, or but the issue you are talking about. Um, I was a teacher, and I did philosophy with children, with my students. They were approximately about 18 years old, and there is a bit of experience within the field of philosophizing with people, and I'd say it depends on the topic, and also, and I would say maximum 30. Then it gets difficult. So when you say 50, you have to arrange the how do people communicate with each other. I think it's not possible to do that in a circle where everyone has a say. Then there are too many then. But I'd say
yeah, so
30 is.
um, yeah, so I mean, you might be right, but here's what I mean to exclude.
Mhm,
Um, some people, uh, uh, like Kirkpatrick Sale wrote a book called "Small is Beautiful," and
okay, yeah.
um, human scale. Um,
Mhm,
he thought everything should, you should have uh, small autonomous communities. Okay,
mhm,
but his small communities often were 10,000 people,
mhm,
and they were going to have like a big town meeting.
mhm.
A big town meeting of 10,000 people uh, is not something you can have face-to-face
Yeah,
deliberation.
yeah, yeah.
So my upper limit is whatever seems reasonable for face-to-face
Mhm,
deliberation.
mhm,
My lower limit is um, it's good to have diversity in a
mhm,
group.
mhm,
And the smaller it is, the less diversity there is.
mhm,
Um, uh, the virtues of deliberation uh, show themselves when you have a diverse population exchanging
mhm,
views. Um, so, um, so I left that as an open question.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
What would be a good number? Not
Yeah.
too small
Mhm,
to be homogeneous, not too big so that you couldn't have face-to-face meetings. And then, so let's take your number of 30. Okay.
mhm,
So if every 30 people, every group of 30 sends one representative or delegate to the next level, and then each of those sends a delegate to the next level, and so on. Okay.
mhm,
Um, 5 levels could accommodate 30 to the 5th power number of people. I had some numbers like if you have a council of 50 and 5 levels, that could accommodate 625 million people. So 25 would be, it would take more levels to accommodate that big a group, but the numbers grow exponentially. And so that means that you could have these little groups, relatively little groups, that it wouldn't take that many levels before you could accommodate a very large overall society.
Yeah, I calculated 7 levels with 30 people in a council for the whole world population of 7 billion people. So that's manageable. That's capable. Yeah, you can overlook 7 levels.
Right. Okay. So now the question is, who are the who gets sent to the next level? Okay. And so these are delegates. They are chosen by the council, and they're chosen by the council as someone who the council believes can reflect their views. But it is one of them, someone who returns to and is part of that lower council. And therefore, the connection between that delegate and the council and me and my US senator is a very different relationship. My US senator represents, some 10 million people. So he can't possibly know what we're thinking. We can't possibly have much input into him. But there's really an organic connection between these delegates and the council that sends them. Now, when they get to the next level, some would say, well, they should be mandated. That is, they should be bound to carry out the will of those who sent them. But the problem with that is the same problem I mentioned when talking about representation. If you bind representatives, then on some level, you don't even need them. They can be replaced by a robot or a chimpanzee, because all they're going to do is say, yes, we vote yes, we vote yes. No, you want them to engage in deliberation. But deliberation only makes sense if the parties to the deliberation can modify their views. Yes, that would be a good compromise. Yeah, I think that would get at what the people in my council were after. They were concerned about this, and so they wanted that. But the way you propose it, yeah, that would be a good way to do it. That kind of deliberation and compromise and discussion requires that the delegate have some ability to think for themselves. But all these deliberations are on record, can be checked by council members. You can be recalled if your council thinks you are not representing them adequately.
How's that? How can he get recalled?
So we've got a council of 30 people, and we send Thomas to the next level. And as I'm watching the videotape of yesterday's second level council meeting, and
so second level, the council meetings are always public, aren't they?
everything below, above the first level are public and
Okay.
videotaped and available.
Mhm.
So we had a very strong feeling that this would be the fair way to do something. And as I watch you speaking on behalf of us, you didn't just compromise, you totally gave up our main point.
Mhm.
And so we might communicate with you and tell you that. And if you sort of insist on continuing, we might say, okay, we're calling you back. We're sending
Okay.
someone else.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Well, this goes back to the question of how decision making takes place even in the original council. Okay, so which I didn't really talk about, and
Mhm.
that's the question of consensus versus majority rule or some
Yeah.
other mechanism.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about
Um,
that.
yeah. So consensus is the sought after result of deliberation and compromise and taking account of other people and their interests and their needs. On the other hand, consensus can also be a mechanism by which a minority can get their way over a majority. Um, think about the United Nations. Uh, you know, the countries often try to come to a consensus statement, and 2/3 of the resolutions in the General Assembly are taken without a vote, meaning, they came to a consensus. Um, that's great. But uh, when there's an insistence on consensus, it also means that if one country says, yes, we like to poke out the eyes of dissidents in our country, but we don't want any mention of that in the human rights statement.
Mhm.
Um, well, they shouldn't have the right to block that.
Mhm.
They shouldn't have. So, it's often said, well, shouldn't an impassioned minority not have their views trampled upon? Yes, but shouldn't an impassioned majority not have their views trampled upon? Well, if one of them is going to have their views trampled on, I'd rather it be the minority rather than the majority. I'd rather it was no one. So the principle I would state as follows: consensus where possible, majority rule otherwise.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Wouldn't it be possible to? I think it's kind of a dilemma um, to introduce kind of a right of the weaker, that the minority, sometimes the minority is weaker than the majority and has, for instance, like if you take a state, could be any state. Yeah, it could be the US trample down on the Native Americans. It could be China trample on the Uyghur that are now in danger. So here is the right of the minority very important, not to be trampled on, to has its right,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
has its
So
say. So um, there is a conflict here in how. So consensus has a big advantage here. So if you have all of the decisions in consensus, you don't have the problem that the minority is overruled, that is treated badly, because consensus ensures that the minority has a say and cannot be trampled down. But
Okay, well,
it has its
yeah,
flaws. Mhm.
so I think there are two problems, but let me just say
Mhm.
before addressing those that another aspect of my model is what can we do to make sure that the majority does not act tyrannically?
Mhm.
So, I'm quite concerned about that problem, and I'll tell you how I address that. Um, but uh, but let me answer the specific case. Um, it's not always easy to say who is the weaker
Mhm.
and who isn't.
Mhm.
Um, so uh, let's say we decided to have um, legal abortion, and 20% say, no, we want abortion to be illegal.
Mhm.
Uh, Now, if it was already legal, then that 20% minority would not be able to make it illegal. But um, should we build a new abortion facility over there on the east side of town? Okay, and 80% of the people say yes, and the 20% who are opposed, in principle to abortion say no. So, and the 20%, let us assume they are um, honest. You know, they say this is I've thought about this a lot. This is not just Judas sexism or whatever. This is a deeply held moral principle. Okay. But the 80% say, look, we're not just saying this to be a pain in the neck. We believe that a woman's fundamental autonomy uh, requires that she have control over her own reproductive life, and so on. So they both feel very strongly.
Mhm.
Um, uh, uh, if you say that you must have consensus, but see, I'm saying 20%. What if it's one person
Mhm.
who says, I don't believe we should spend any money on vaccines. I
Mhm.
think vaccines are wrong. So not only shouldn't we mandate vaccines, we shouldn't spend a penny on them.
Mhm.
Do we let this one person, uh, you know, control our
Mhm.
destiny?
Mhm.
Um, so uh, so if you take something like um, the right to same-sex marriage
Mhm.
in the United States, even though same-sex couples are a minority, a majority supports it.
Mhm.
Okay? And so the minority on that issue would be the people who oppose the right to same-sex marriage. Do we want them to have veto power because they
Mhm.
are the minority? Now you might say, but they're not a weaker party. But I'm not sure it's always easy to discern who the weaker party is. In the abortion case, the anti-abortion people will say, look, the weakest party is the unborn fetus. Um, so we're the champions of the weaker party.
Mhm.
Okay, the pro-choice
Mhm.
majority will say, no, no, we're the champions of women who have been oppressed for centuries. Um, both are weaker parties.
Mhm.
Under
Mhm.
some
Mhm.
under some version. Okay, that all said, I think the question of preventing majority abuse of minorities is a critical one in political theory. Um, And it's one that has never been satisfactorily solved anywhere, really, because you have this problem. In the United States, at least, we say that's the job of the courts. We have a constitution that entrenches certain rights. So free speech is written into the Constitution. And that means that even a majority in Congress can't pass a law abridging free speech.
Mhm.
And so if Congress tried to pass a law saying atheists are not allowed to speak in public, we would expect the courts to say, sorry, legislature, you can't pass that law because it violates our Constitution.
Mhm.
But no constitution can list all the possibilities. So you have to have some body, some decision-making body that's going to look at the specific case and say, is this a case of free speech, or is this a case of libel? Is this a case of, is pornography different? Is hate speech different? Is,
Mhm.
et cetera.
Mhm.
And so a lot of Americans say, so, the courts are what protect minorities, and we want to, but the thing about the court is, as I mentioned earlier, the court is not elected by the people, but is chosen by the president, confirmed by the Senate. So it's sort of an indirect thing. And then they have life terms. So the court is not a democratic body. Now, in some United States jurisdictions, judges are elected.
Mhm.
You might say, okay, so that'll make the courts democratic. But there's a problem with that, which is, if the courts are elected, won't they just be subject to the same majoritarian tyrannical ideas as the population was?
Mhm.
Right? So in places where judges get elected in the United States, you often have judges campaigning for office saying, elect me and I'll throw those people in the gas chamber and I'll,
Yeah.
I mean, so uh, so it's tricky. You want to shield the court from majoritarian prejudices, but you also want the court to be democratic and reflect the sort of the will of the people. And so there's not been a good way to mix these two. And so my proposal picks up on what you discussed earlier about these deliberative bodies of everyday citizens getting together. And I would have a high council court and a council court at each level above the first level. They will be chosen by lot. They will be big enough so that the law of large numbers will make it unlikely that you'll have, four crazies who
Mhm.
will, dominate the body.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so big enough that you have that, but small enough that they can deliberate.
Mhm.
So these will be everyday people
Mhm.
asked to deliberate on the question, is this ruling by this democratically elected council a violation of important basic rights
Mhm.
of a minority?
Mhm.
So it's a democratic body checking another democratic body. but because they're chosen in two different ways, they're not just a repeat of one another. They're not out campaigning, elect me and I'll throw this person in jail forever. Um, um, and the other job, and that job of protecting minorities, is actually a subset of a larger job. And the larger job is figuring out the appropriate level on which a decision should be made. Okay. So at the lowest level, what it means is, does anybody have the right to tell you what your religion should be? No, our basic belief in minority rights is no, you have no one, not even no council, no matter how high or low, can tell you what you can do. So a council court will say, if some legislative body, if some council tried to infringe on your religion, the council court would say, no, that's something for an individual to decide. Other times they will say, that's something for the second level council, not the third level council to decide. Why the second? Because the thing they decided only affects their own member, the people in that second council geographic area. Therefore, the third level council shouldn't really intrude on that. But in this other case, they might say, no, that's something for the third level council, because what the second level council wanted to do is going to cause pollution that will affect not just them, but people outside in the broader third level. So the job of the courts is to decide who is the appropriate decision maker.
But if an issue affects all people in a region, let's say it's a region big enough for a third level council, so it affects all people. Is it only discussed then in the third level council or in all levels? What I want to say is, so that the lowest level is discussing it, and then the decision-making process moves on to the third level, or is it only discussed in the and decided in the third level council?
No, it's discussed all the way up. Okay. But the thing is, it's hard to do this without a blackboard. Some people in one of the sub-regions might say, we've been discussing it in our lower level council and in our second level council, and it has some marginal impact on the rest of the whole third level region, but really pretty small. And so it really seems to us that we ought to decide this and not be subject to the will of the whole region, third region. The third region says, no, we think the impact on us is pretty substantial. And so then this is where the council court weighs in, and they might say, and they don't, so the two easy things to say, well, I guess the three easy things to say are, one, they might say, it's not really up to the third level or the second level or the first level. This is somebody's basic rights. And so it's, each person should decide this on their own. Or they might say, no, this is something that is overwhelmingly a concern of the second level and no one else, and therefore second level should decide it. Or they might say, this really affects everybody in the region, so all three levels should decide it, the whole three level. Or they might say, it does affect the people in the second level more than most other people, but not exclusively them. And therefore, we need some intermediate kind of procedure. And that procedure might be, it would have to be decided by 2/3 of the second level,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or have to be decided by the second level after they have a deliberative meeting with the third level,
Mm-hmm.
so they can discuss the ways it interacts with each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the courts are um, for every level a special court, or one court for 3 levels.
So no courts on the first level,
Okay.
court on the second level, one of whose functions um, is this something that first level should decide for themselves, or is this something that the second level is appropriate to decide? And then the third level court, same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So there.
And so it's not unlike the structure of courts in the United States, where there are district courts and uh, courts for bigger and bigger geographic areas.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start your complaint at a lower level and then go to higher levels.
Okay. Okay.
But in each case, the judges on these courts are chosen by lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how many people would you propose are in such a court?
Well, as I say, I don't know. I took a shot at 40.
Okay.
Um, um, again, you want it to be big enough so that you don't have the danger of, when you choose at random, you happen to get 3 crackpots.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want it to be too big that they can't deliberate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, and this is why this ties into Pari Khan, some kind of decent
Mm-hmm.
economic system,
Mm-hmm.
which is this will be these people's job for, it's not just one case at a time that they're chosen for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it might be that they have a year term.
Mm-hmm.
So
And then they
they
rotate.
are, well, yeah. So you might have a 2-year term, but they're staggered. So every year, half of them
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
are replaced.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um,
And they, of course, have a staff, just like current judges have staffs
yeah.
that will help them with technical matters. But the actual, do we think this affects this group enough to make them have a right to overrule this group, or is this really a minority rights issue?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And because you have councils in your polity, and the concept of Paracon has also councils. How do they interconnect? How do they communicate? Because one can imagine that I don't have time to work or to care for my family because I'm either in a council in a polit for my polity, or in a economic field council. How is there a connection?
Okay, so in Paricon, there are 2 kinds of councils: producer councils and consumer councils. It seemed to me that the councils I'm talking about could be the consumer councils.
Mm-hmm.
That because they're geographically based, if you want to buy the collective good of a park,
Mm-hmm.
that's a geographically based consumer council that would make that decision. That could be the same group that is your primary level political council.
Mm-hmm.
So, so there would still be, if you also had a job somewhere, you would also be part of a producers council, a workers council, but it would not be the workers council that would decide, should we have, the following social welfare program? Should we do that? Those are consumer council decisions in any event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, but I think of if the councils are regional based, geographically based, they are neither consumer nor worker councils, because people are chosen in the councils not because they work or produce something, but they live in a certain place. So,
but that is a consumer council, and my sort of my political council
mm-hmm.
have the same geographic basis. In other words, I might live on a block,
Mm-hmm.
and the people on the block put together a consumer proposal, which
Mm-hmm.
includes our individual proposals and any collective proposals we have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if we want to pave the street or put a
Mm-hmm.
traffic light there or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of consumption decisions are really political decisions also.
Yeah, that's true. But isn't that an ideal situation? On the contrary, it could be that I live in a certain place, but I work in a place 30 miles away. So
so you're on a workers' council at your work,
mm-hmm.
but your consumer council is the locale of your primary council.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there any priority in of the political council compared to the workers' council? For instance, you have a bike factory, and they say, okay, we need more bikes, and therefore more steel. Steel would need more to produce steel. We wouldn't need more energy, but political council said we are at the top. We cannot produce more energy in a renewable way, so you cannot produce more bikes. The worker council says, okay, we need more energy, so we burn coal. Who has the last say here? Or the final?
Well, look, I mean,
or who makes the decision?
So, it seems to me that if the people of the society want a limit on carbon emissions and set it at a certain level, that then becomes a constraint for every workplace.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, in other words, you could ask Michael Albert, look,
Mm-hmm.
you've got consumer councils and you've got producer councils, and in his case, there's sort of an interaction between them,
Mm-hmm.
Where one says, well, we want these goods, and the other says, well, we don't want to do that much work, and so they keep revising till they get to a happy medium.
Mm-hmm.
But if the society decided, look, we believe that it is wrong for us to kill animals and eat animals, and we are going to become a vegetarian society, then that would trump anyone's individual consumer request for that schnitzel, and it would also, but it would also trump the farmer's production request, saying, I want to bring this many pigs to market.
Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. I still have a lot of questions I want to ask you, but I don't want to use your time too much. But one thing I have to ask you, because
Yes.
we do a conference from anarchist perspective. What is your connection to anarchism?
Um, it's not an easy question to answer. Um, in As I came to political maturity, there were many people on the left who were part of different Leninist sects,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew this was something that I objected to. There were also people who called themselves or who were right-wing anarchists.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of someone like, well, if you had a background teaching philosophy, someone like Robert Nozick,
Yeah.
Okay, who
Yeah.
believes that the free market is supreme,
Mm-hmm.
and every inequality that comes out of a free market is a just inequality, and so on. And I objected to that just as much, if not more, than I objected to Leninism. So, so I situated myself as a anarchist slash libertarian socialist slash council communist. Um, so that is, it's, so I wanted that libertarian aspect that was important to anarchists and libertarian socialists at the same time. Um, I gave talks at right-wing anarchist conferences with titles, a title like "Why Every Anarchist Should Be a Socialist." What I meant was why you should be a libertarian socialist. So you should maintain your libertarian principles,
Mm-hmm.
but um, uh, Henry Ford is not a model of libertarianism just because he wanted to do whatever he could do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Private economic power is just as dangerous to human freedom as is overweening government power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I sometimes, in some circles, I'll call myself an anarchist, in some I'll call myself a libertarian socialist. I should say that I, I have differences of opinion with important figures in each of these movements. Um, uh, my sense is that Emma Goldman was too much opposed to majorities
Mm-hmm.
and felt that that was a violation of anarchist freedom. Um, uh, what do I think if the pandemic gets worse in the United States and Joe Biden says you must wear a mask? I would not consider that a violation of anarchist or of my principles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it interferes with freedom, but there's always this question, how much does your freedom hurt somebody else? And spreading a pandemic seems to me a legitimate place where solidarity trumps your individual, sorry to use the word trumps, but trumps your individual, uh, uh, individualistic freedom.
Okay. So thank you very much for giving us the talk. I hope that many people will listen. And we will see each other again at the conference.
Good, good. Looking forward to it.
Okay, have a nice time.
Thank you very much.